Hey guys, and welcome to my complete Dragonkin laboratory, also known as Elite Dungeons 2 guide. When you're ready, grab your cup of tea, sit back, relax, and enjoy. This is my table of contents for my Elite Dungeons 2 guide. You can find timestamps in the description below to each section of the video. Here are the recommended stats for Elite Dungeons 2. If you're doing this solo or watching this guide because you want to solo Elite Dungeons 2, these are pretty much a requirement. However, if you're doing this in a group of 3, you can get away with way lower stats. I recommend these stats for obvious reasons, for curses, high tier weaponry and armor, herblore for potions like the super anti-fire potions or overloads, and summoning for a BOB familiar for extra food, or you can use a DPS familiar. Here are some high level gear setup examples. You can get away with lower level weapons and armor, but these are just some general examples. The wiki itself actually has a ton of gear setup examples and inventory setups for both ranged, melee, and magic. Now you don't see it in the gear setup here, but for example with ranged, a Scrimshaw of Cruelty would be useful to use here. Adventure perks like Aftershock are really good in Elite Dungeons because you're fighting multiple mobs at the same time in between the bosses. I recommend also bringing a Luck of the Dwarves or other luck ring to switch to when you finally kill the boss. Just before he dies, of course. Or alternatively, the Ring of Luck or Luck of the Dwarves can be your main ring instead of a Ring of Death if you do not have the money for one. Here are a ton of useful items for Elite Dungeons 2. Now super anti-fires are almost essential here, and I highly recommend you get them and bring them along in a flask or potion. An enhanced Excalibur can save you food because of the healing ability. A Dragon Slayer sigil is also useful to bring here as it gives you extra damage against dragons. Cinderbane gloves here are pretty much best in slot as you can poison most of the monsters, or you can be using weapon poison plus potions as well. A Ring of Vigor switch is also useful for your ultimates, and a rune pouch with the vulnerability runes and air runes for magic if you are using magic is highly recommended for the bosses. And then in green there's a ton of optional items you can bring along, like the Gothic staff for the ability, a mobile and or a planted feet switch, summoning flasks if you're using a steel titan, a slay helmet if you're on dragon tasks because that will give you extra damage, lucky charms which you can get from the reward shop and you get a few free the first time I believe, mechanized chinchompas if you're using ranged to kill the mobs really quickly using AoE attacks, amber criminal bolts E, aka the enchanted ones with ranged, because various bolts have nice specials or passives. As for getting to Elite Dungeons 2, there are 4 ways to get there. The first way is getting there through the max portal, which of course requires you to be maxed and requires the completion of Elite Dungeons 1. The second way is teleporting there using a Dragonkin Laboratory teleport tab, which you can buy from the reward shop right there for 1000 Dungeoneering tokens each. The third way is teleporting there using the group system, however you can only do this with multiple people in a group. Sadly, you cannot do this on your own. And the fourth way is the way I do not recommend. You can walk there through the wilderness by going east of the demonic runes. Now what I recommend you do if you've never been there is walk there through the wilderness without any items equipped, so you don't have a risk. Once you're there, it is safe and there is a bank so you can gear up at the location itself. And once you're there, you can actually buy those teleport tabs so that you do not have to walk there again. Now let's talk a bit about the Elite Dungeons 2 itself. Here's a map on screen made by someone on the wiki, I don't know who so I can't credit him, but he made a very good and clear map of the entire Elite Dungeon. Now what I personally did is add a red circle to the map so that you can see where you will be starting once you enter the dungeon itself. Now an Elite Dungeon is basically just a dungeon filled with mobs. And between these mobs there are barriers, and you have to kill enough of a certain type of monster to have a barrier open up. Now depending on where you are in the dungeon, you don't actually have to kill every single monster for all the barriers to open up. Sometimes you only have to kill a few of each monster to open up the next barrier. I'll be talking a bit more about this in these sections separately, as I'll be showing a section map per section later on in the video once we get to these sections, and oh boy, I'm saying section a lot. Now within the dungeon you actually have chests. Now these chests can also collect your loot, or if you decide to leave all the loot on the ground, give you a chance for double drops. However, you do not want to be doing this for the dungeon itself, as it's not worth it. What you do want to be doing is toggling the chest every time you meet a boss in the dungeon, so Astellarn, then Verak Lith, and then the Blackstone Dragon. dragon, as this way you'll have a chance to double your drops from each boss fight. However, for the dungeon itself, it really is not worth picking up all the drops and it's just a waste of time, so you're better off toggling your chest back to auto loot. These chests actually count as checkpoints as well. There's quite a few in the dungeon and this is really useful if you want to bank for extra supplies, and then you can just go back and teleport to your latest checkpoint. Now that we've covered the basics of the elite dungeon layout, let's go ahead and start with the first section. And just so you guys know, I am doing it in a trio in the clips. However, if you're doing this solo, it might be a lot harder and take you much longer to clear the sections of mobs. Once you enter the first section of the dungeon, be sure to toggle your chest to auto loot. You'll first encounter a bunch of slimes that hit very hard, so either play melee and use devotion as much as you can, and try to cluster them up to kill them with AoE abilities. Then the first barrier will open up to some dragons. Soul Spit is also incredibly good here. I personally switch on the Vampirism aura at the first point of the dungeon. Now in the top left corner you can actually see a little mini-map of the first section of the dungeon leading up to the first boss, Astellarn. This map also shows you a general guideline on where to activate Sunshine for maximum efficiency throughout the dungeon. Now like I said earlier, you don't actually have to kill every single monster to open up the next barrier. If there are monsters from a previous barrier that already opened up following you, you can pretty much ignore those. Now the monsters you are seeing right now on screen are monsters you really want to pile up and kill with AoE abilities or Corruption Blast or Shots, as these are much easier and faster to finish off using these abilities. Then right before the first boss you'll encounter some celestial dragons that you have to kill. Then the next room is the first boss, Astellarn. I'll quickly be going over the mechanics of this boss. So the mechanics of Astellarn aren't per se hard, but if you time it wrong you can get killed pretty easily. You have pulsars, a wormhole and a neutron star, and the celestial rain attack. Other than that, he just has your basic auto attacks. When you first start the fight, you actually want to align yourself with one of these red lines. This has to do with the other mechanics of this boss coming later on in the fight. After a few hits, Astellarn will spawn his first pulsar. This is a reoccurring mechanic. You want to attack this ball of whatever it is, and kill it as fast as you can, as it will deal typeless bleeding damage. At some point during the fight, Astellarn will actually choose one player to spawn a wormhole upon. You want to get outside of this wormhole as fast as you can. Now I mentioned standing in a certain aligned position earlier on for this reason, as later on a neutron star will spawn and will fly towards you. The neutron star must be avoided and you do not want to make contact with the neutron star. However, you do want to lure it towards the wormhole to make it white. And the last mechanic is Celestial Rain, which Astellarn will spawn randomly throughout the fight. All you really have to do is just walk out of that side of the arena, as you'll be taking a bleeding type of damage. You can actually equip a shield and res the first Celestial Rain hit for some free HP. Also, you want to be standing inside the white wormhole, as standing inside the white wormhole will give you increased damage against the boss. Once you've killed the first boss, toggle your chest back to auto loot and continue throughout the dungeon to section 2. The second section is actually filled with a lot of black dragons and ends with wildy worms. Having a black dragon task and bringing your Slayer helmet along can actually help you a lot here. As you guys can see on the video, we are ignoring some of the wildy worms and mobs, as you do not need to kill all of them. The Dragon Slayer invention perk with the increased damage against dragons would also be super useful throughout this entire dungeon. In my opinion, the second section of the Dragonkin laboratory is the easiest in terms of mob difficulty. As with the first section, you can see a map of the section in the top left corner of the screen, giving you some hints on where you could activate Sunshine for extra efficiency. After the last few barriers of wildy worms and some black dragons, you'll be ready to encounter your second boss, Verak Lith. If you're with a trio, be sure to enter the boss room all together so that no one gets blocked out. Be sure to toggle your chest to non-auto loot for a chance for double drops right here as well. Verak Lith has the most mechanics of all the bosses in Elite Dungeons 2 and is probably considered the most difficult boss of Elite Dungeons 2. I actually put the attack rotation specifically on screen for this boss, as this way you can actually anticipate the mechanics of Verak Lith. The mechanics are spires, which are pretty much rock spikes, the eggs, the Black Dragon Dive Bomb, and the Fire Tornado or Firewall thingy. The first reoccurring mechanic, the spires, are pretty easy to avoid, and you can actually just ignore them kind of almost, but just don't. You'll get a message on screen and the screen will start to shake and you want to switch to melee prayer, and as soon as the spike comes up and you've taken the hit, you want to switch back to your magic prayer and kill the spire as fast as you can. The next mechanic, the eggs mechanic, is pretty easy if you know what you're doing. Verak will actually launch a poison, ice or shock energy at you. Then you'll see green arrows on screen. You want to go to these green arrows and stand in there until the energy or ball hits you. Then what you want to do is run to the opposite type of egg to whatever you got hit with. In my case it was poison, so it ran towards the ice eggs. You can actually mess this up, and if you do and you know you messed up, be sure to eat up as high as you can, and you can, if you're lucky, survive the hit like I do in this clip. Having bruise and rocktails on your action bar to tick eat fast is very useful for this boss. The next mechanic is when Verak Lith says let the flames melt the flesh from your bone. At this point, one player will be selected to have a sort of fire spot underneath them, and what you want to do at that point is run away or surge away from the area as fast as possible, as after this the fire tornadoes will spawn and they will deal a lot of damage. The player on screen actually surges away, and that's pretty much the easiest way to avoid this mechanic completely. The next mechanic is the Dragon Dive Bomb. Once you see these red circles on the floor and you are selected, you want to watch out and just keep moving to a certain side, as after a few seconds a dragon will lay down a line of fire doing a lot of damage. You do not want to be standing inside this fire ever. And that's all the mechanics of Verak Lith. Now let's move on to the third section of the dungeon. To start the third section of the dungeon, you must move to the red circle seen on screen. It's a bit of a different route than walking forward like with the other boss. You have to kind of walk backwards to get here. You can also bank and teleport to a chest nearby, which is a checkpoint if you need more supplies. Be sure to toggle back on auto loot for this section of the dungeon. The third section of the dungeon has a variety of gemstone dragons. These dragons have a very high health pool and a small mechanic. This mechanic is spikes. Once you see a dark area beneath you, you want to move to the side to avoid the damage. In this particular clip, one of the members of our trio actually went a bit ahead and cleared some of the dragons already. Once you've opened the last barrier, be sure to toggle your chest back to manual looting for a chance of extra drops, because the Blackstone Dragon drops the ability codexes, which are worth a lot of GP. Once you've opened the last barrier, be sure to toggle your chest back to manual looting for a chance of extra drops, because the Blackstone Dragon drops the ability codexes, which are worth a lot of GP. So the final boss of the Dragonkin laboratory. You expect it to be the hardest boss. And it really isn't. It is actually the easiest boss of the bunch. But not to worry, I'll explain how to avoid the mechanics. But in short, all you really have to do is know where you're standing and don't stand still all the time. Really, most of the mechanics can just be avoided by walking around, which is really easy. So the first mechanic, the spikes. So much like the gemstone dragons, the screen will start to shake and then spikes will come out from the floor. What you want to be doing at this point is surging away or moving from where you were standing. This is how you avoid these spikes. So the second phase starts with black hands, which will spawn under 520,000 life points. You can really avoid most of the damage by keeping your distance and standing to a corner of the hand. Now at some point these hands will actually spawn little smaller hands that go towards you. For some reason they didn't hit me in the clip, but what you want to do is avoid these hands as they will do a lot of damage. So basically keep your distance from these hands and try to kill them as quickly as possible. Then once they die, keep your distance as well. The next mechanic is the spiral fire or line fire. It's just fire on the ground and it will circle around the boss. What you can do is stand closer to the boss to avoid the spiral, but this really depends on where it spawns. Sometimes it can be random as well for some reason. I don't know why this happens, but it does. So simply put, avoid the fire and you'll live. Now at 260,000 life points, the Blackstone Dragon starts to hop around the room. Do not come near the dragon and keep running around and keep your distance at all times. At this point, the dragon is actually invincible. After flying up and down 7 times, the dragon will actually say, "Show me the light." At this point, the dragon will spawn more fire and you'll actually be able to damage the dragon again. Another mechanic I did not mention is the shadow bomb. Now the dragon will say, "Get out of me," or "The shadow overwhelms." The dragon will then choose a player and hit him for 4,000 typeless damage. I did not mention this at the start because you can really ignore this mechanic as long as you keep your health up high. So, that was my Elite Dungeons 2 guide. I hope you guys enjoyed and found it helpful. Now, I know there's very little specific things and switches I did not cover, but this guide holds enough information for you to go out there and try this for yourself, solo or with friends. Now, what I'll actually be doing is leaving unlisted boss fights in the description below, which are uncut and unsped up if you want to see a full boss fight for yourself. And with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed and found it helpful, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.